I think we can all agree that the world would be better if everyone would just delete Twitter. Twitter as a platform is built on the back of outrage and fueled by addiction that keeps people doom scrolling for hours every single day. Nuance is often completely absent from any discussions I see, along with reasonable thinking. And performative activism is not only encouraged, it's required if you want to survive in that wild, wild west of the internet. Now, I'm not going to say that there isn't some very real activism taking place on Twitter. There is. For example, Fridays for Future and March for Our Lives are some amazing organizations run by young people who want to make real change in the community. And many of the Black Lives Matter protests were organized on Twitter as well. I'm also a big proponent of, if you are going to be using Twitter, putting your pronouns in your bio. It's a simple act that helps make the space more inclusive for everyone. I am a cis female, and since I like being referred to by she, her pronouns, I might as well put that in my bio so people know. However, piggybacking off the previous example, there are many reasons why someone might not want to put their pronouns in their bio. For example, let's say they're trans or non-binary and haven't come out yet. They might not want to out themselves by that act of putting pronouns in their bio, however, they don't want to misgender themselves online either. Or maybe they come from a non-supportive family and don't really want anyone they know finding their account. However, I've seen people say anyone without pronouns in their bio is automatically trash. This is hurting more people than it helps, and in fact could be hurting the very people it's supposed to protect. Or people who demand every brand speak out against racism. What is Sunny D gonna do about it? Here's the honest truth. Brands don't care about social justice. Brands are using social justice as a tool to gain your money. And that is manipulative, and that is not cool, and do not encourage it. I would love to see these brands or these high-profile celebrities making real changes in their lives instead of just posting a black square on Instagram. Think about it. If the brand isn't actually making any kind of change within their company, but trying to get your business and your money using performative activism that is backed up by no real action, that is not a good thing. That is a bad thing. When a company that exploits child labor speaks out against racism on their social media, but does nothing about the exploitation of their workers, plus the outrage cycle that is fostered on Twitter is doing very real harm to real people. I genuinely want the world to be a better place. I genuinely want the world to be a less hateful place. And that is not the kind of work I'm seeing being done on Twitter. I am not seeing love for marginalized communities. I am not seeing justice for marginalized communities, and I'm certainly not seeing progress towards world peace. I'm seeing people tearing each other apart over the smallest mistakes. There are a million reasons someone might not want to put pronouns in their bio, or someone might not want to post a black square on Instagram, and not all of them are because they're hateful or bigoted. Let me tell you a story. A Twitter story. This, in fact, is the story that made me decide to leave Twitter forever, or as long as possible until the platform improves. I log into Twitter after 5 days of a break, and I see the name Lindsay Ellis is trending. I have been a fan of Lindsay for a couple of months now, and so I click on her name, worried about what's going to happen, because when a YouTuber trends, it's usually, unfortunately, not because they dropped a banger video. It's usually because they're being cancelled. Sure enough, I click on her name, and the top posts are things like, Lindsay Ellis is a horrible person, and I'm so glad we're finally getting rid of her. This makes my heart sink, because I remember watching her talk at XOXO Festival about her experience with online harassment mobs and how that drove her to some very dark places. I want to show a message of support, but I'm afraid that by lumping myself in with her, I will also receive hate. To understand the specific details of why she was being canceled, just watch her video. But basically, people were accusing her of being racist because of this tweet, which, in my mind, is very clearly not racist, and that is 100% not the way she intended it when she wrote it. Watched Raya and the Last Dragon, and I think we need to come up with a name for this genre that is basically Avatar: The Last Airbender redux. It's like half of all YA fantasy published in the last few years anyway. Lindsay was accused of anti-Asian racism because of this tweet, and although I can see why it could have made some people uncomfortable or be read that way, the response to it, calling her a racist, was blown very out of proportion. She was merely comparing two children's animated films by Western studios to each other, and they both have a pretty similar plot. This was not enough evidence to justify calling her a racist, or the hate mobs that came after her for quite a while. But that's a whole other can of worms that I'll let Lindsay explain. For now, the point is basically just that she was receiving a ton of hate and vitriol for what turned out to be a pretty minor incident. The amount of hate she was receiving was definitely not proportional to the things that she said. It seemed like people were just kind of looking for a reason to cancel her. And the parallels were extremely strong to the ContraPoints canceling of 2019. The idea of taking something someone says so far out of proportion from the way they originally intended it, and using this thing to paint them as a horrible person. And anyone who stands up for them or defends them is immediately labeled a horrible person too. And the idea that when someone is canceled, it's okay to go after all of their friends and associates, and demand that all of their friends, coworkers, and associates apologize for what they did. The moment I decided to leave Twitter forever, or at least as long as I possibly could, was when I saw that they were photoshopping fake Jenny Nicholson tweets to make her look racist. I mean, obviously racism is never okay, and yes, people who are racist should definitely face consequences, but if we are just basically accusing people of racism when they are not actually being racist, you can see why that could be an issue. That's all. Now, if you don't know who Jenny Nicholson is, she basically does like fandom, nerd, geek girl content, and she's amazing, and she's hilarious, and she's a fairly wholesome YouTuber. And because she's friends with Lindsay Ellis, people were fabricating racist content to get her canceled too. That is horrible behavior. I saw that people were fabricating tweets of Jenny, and I was very angry, and I wanted to say something in her defense. However, I realized at that moment that if I dared stand up for Lindsay or Jenny or Sarah or Natalie, any of the people that were being lumped into this whole fiasco, which I believed was the morally right thing to do, I ran the risk of being minorly canceled myself. I ran the risk of receiving hate for standing up for people receiving hate. So I decided now was a good time to stop being complicit in the deliberate outrage cycle that Twitter fosters and just step away. I didn't want Twitter shaping my worldview. It was just full of outrage all of the time, and I did not want those thoughts in my head. So I decided to step back and no longer be complicit in this system that makes it somehow morally okay to hate people. To hate people who have not done anything however you say it. I'll spell it. Gosh, I'm smart.
It's the Mahajapit, Majahapit, Mapajahit, Mahapajit, Mapajahit, Majapahit.
Later, Lindsay released a video that revealed the impact this cancellation had on her, and spoiler alert, it wasn't a good one for her mental health. And the fact that people were targeting her colleagues provided a sense of guilt. She felt responsible for things that were happening to her colleagues. She felt responsible for the hate mobs that were going after them. So that was the moment I decided I would no longer, ever participate in the public shaming of any individual. I understand that there are individuals who do evil, awful, and horrible things, and those actions do need to be condemned, but I don't think the right setting for justice is a Twitter mob. The Twitter mob justice is not real justice, it is not real condemnation, and it does nothing but make the world just a little bit worse. Lindsay spoke at length about this in her own video too, basically saying that a lot of the white folks on Twitter want to be one of the good ones, and so they go out of their way to be super extra non-problematic to a problematic extent. The truth is that in Twitter there's almost no room for nuance. You're either one of the good ones, or you're an evil, horrible monster who deserves to be condemned and guillotined. And the fact is, most people lie somewhere on the in-between. In fact, no one is 100% morally good. It's just impossible. There is not a single human being on this planet who has never made a mistake. Just that some people are more famous or more visible, and so their mistakes are therefore more famous or more visible. Conversely, I don't think there's a single human being on this planet who is 100% bad without any bit of good in them. And so when we look at things in terms of these absurd black and whites, when we think of people in terms of these absurd dichotomies of good and evil, we're never accurately judging someone. Plus, trying to judge someone by a collage of bad tweets leaves room for interpreting things such as sarcasm. A lot of the tweets that I've seen people get canceled for were just poorly worded sarcastic statements. So, Twitter has no nuance. You're either good or you're evil, and sarcasm isn't real because if it's a poorly worded sarcastic statement, then everyone will just take you at face value, which is really, really dangerous. Vocal tone is extremely important for interpreting sarcasm, but naturally people are going to be sarcastic on the internet, and when they are, it is often terribly misinterpreted to tragic consequences. Another thing that really bothered me about this whole debacle is that there's really no right way to proceed if you happen to get canceled, and it could happen to any of us. If Jenny Nicholson could get canceled, anybody could get canceled. And so if you do happen to get canceled, there's no real right way to respond to it. If you apologize, people will call you a faker. If you defend yourself, that's even worse in their eyes, and if you delete your account like Lindsay did, they'll just celebrate. Plus, the things I've seen people get canceled for are just getting more and more ridiculous. I used to see people getting quote-unquote canceled for things like sexually harassing and assaulting women, or in the case of people like Shane Dawson doing some pretty horrible things in the past, and that is a very legitimate reason for deplatforming someone. Lately, the reasons I've been seeing people get canceled have been getting more and more ridiculous. Maybe they liked a poorly worded tweet, or they wrote a poorly worded sarcastic tweet, or they said something that could be construed as offensive, but only if you decided to interpret it in the worst way possible. Our media comprehension has become horrible. I'm just gonna say it. Learn media literacy, people. It's important. Basically, Twitter puts people in the impossible position of trying to be 1,000% morally perfect all of the time, or risk the consequences, and then when they are attacked by mobs seeking justice that is not real justice at all, there is no real right course of action they can take to spare themselves from this hate. There's nothing they can do to appease these mobs. And it sometimes feels impossible to even take a stand against it, because you risk being canceled yourself, or you risk people saying that you're just standing in the way of true justice. Canceling is no longer a legitimate tool of justice or a legitimate way to make marginalized voices heard. I get it. People feel beaten down. They feel trodden upon. They feel like they're never listened to, and they feel like their rights are constantly in danger. They want to do something about it. But canceling is not the right way to seek this justice that everyone craves. You look around the world and you see that it is a oftentimes sucky, horrible, and unfair place. And you want to do something to make it more fair. You think that by attacking these people you've been told are horrible and hateful, and by bringing them down a peg, you'll be making real, true change in the world, but you're not. It's just making the world worse. I have seen many people who are net positive to this world driven to the brink of their mental health by Twitter mobs. And some will say it's not that big of a deal, especially if you have a large platform, but having a large platform online does not make someone any less human. And they are just as vulnerable to mental health crises as anyone else. And they are just as vulnerable to being affected by intense hatred as anybody else. Imagine if you were constantly being bombarded with tweets saying you are a horrible person, you're a monster, even people saying you deserve to die. I don't think there's anyone who deserves that treatment. Lindsay, Jenny, Natalie, and Sarah certainly did not deserve that treatment. Nothing they did or said can justify the things that were done and said to them. And this isn't just about Lindsay, Jenny, Natalie, and Sarah. This could happen to any of us. We have to cancel culture. We have to do something about it. Step away from Twitter as a platform until either the problem is corrected or Twitter is left to be run by the cancelers, therefore just making it a huge mob fest all the time that all of us sane people can just quietly step away from. The most important thing to remember, I think, is that the people that you are interacting with online are, most of the time, some of them are robots. Real people. Real live human beings who can be and are affected by the words that you say. I know this kind of makes me sound like an elementary school teacher, but try to picture the other person on the other side of the screen as if you're talking to them in person before you type something out. Maybe it'll make you think twice about anything you're trying to say. Twitter's whole environment is designed to foster outrage and basically be the death of nuance, and that's why I think it'd be best if we all just kind of stepped away from it for a while. So, in summary, Twitter sucks because it's impossible to be nuanced there. Morality is seen as either you're angelic or you're monstrous. It's a complete dichotomy with no gray area. Twitter's interface is designed to foster outrage. Outrage gets likes and retweets. The bar to be canceled has been set super low, and one can be canceled for something you have to work really hard to see as even mildly offensive. Therefore, all of us, as regular human beings, are vulnerable to cancellation. Even if you think that you're invulnerable to be canceled, you could be canceled. They could come for you next. The victims of online mobs are real people and are actually deeply affected by it, no matter how big their platform might be. Therefore, it is every internet user's responsibility to combat these online hate mobs and either commit to fixing Twitter as a platform or abandoning the platform altogether until the mobs are the only thing that's left and they gradually consume themselves. If you found this video interesting at all, I would highly recommend Canceling by ContraPoints and Mask Off by Lindsay Ellis, as they go into much more detail and they are by much more experienced and wise YouTubers than I am. Big shout out to Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints, Lindsay Ellis of Lindsay Ellis, Jenny Nicholson, and Sarah Zed. I'm so sorry that you guys had to go through this. You did not deserve it. Keep making content. Your content is fantastic. It's one of the best things on the internet, and I hope you guys never stop, but if you do, that's your decision too. Before you go, here is your reminder to respect women, respect pronouns, and of course, respect Bill Wirtz, because he is a princess.